my pleasure this morning to go over a little bit about what CENGN is all about. And if I could get the slides, please. Thank you. So in developing this presentation this morning, I was thinking, what angle could I take? I'm the interim CEO. I've been working at CENGN and working at Expo, but at CENGN for the last 5 weeks. So I'm not a deep expert. I may forget somebody's name or that kind of thing. But what I wanted to do is, I was on the board of CENGN, and the company that I work for, Expo, does projects inside CENGN. But now that I'm this interim CEO, I'm seeing under the hood and deep into the engine of the company. And so what I wanted to do is share what I've learned over the last 5 weeks. The very first thing, and Jenna did it already, but I just wanted to shout out as well to our sponsors for today. Really appreciated the money that they've contributed. Great companies, great organizations, and I believe they're all represented here in the room. And they also have booths outside, so I encourage you to please have a dialogue with them, whatever your... Oh, thanks, Rick. And I encourage you to have a conversation and see what you can get started with these companies. So thank you again for the sponsorship. The opportunity that is in front of us here, just to paint a grid picture, is the amount of money that's being spent in the ICT space. And when I talk about ICT, we think a lot about telecom here in Canada because, as Jenna said, 90% of the telecom research that happens in Canada happens right here in Canada. But if we take a wider look and we see that on a worldwide basis, $3.8 trillion is being spent on ICT in general, including the compute and all of that. And that's growing at 5 to 6% per annum. This is an amazing, huge number that's growing quite fast. When we take a look at something more specific to CENGN and what we do, then you can see that the market for NFV and SDN is estimated to be $105 billion by the year 2020. I think we're probably a little behind that curve, but I think we'll also catch up very quickly. And what's happening is the networks of yesterday that were based on proprietary hardware are being converted to being driven by software instead, and that's what CENGN helps to empower. The last bullet on this point here is that there's also a new market developing, which is the Internet of Things. And I'm sure you've all heard of this. And what is the Internet of Things? It means that everything that we can imagine could be connected to the Internet, either through a wired, but more likely through a wireless connection. And so now what we have is a problem of scaling. If you start to talk about 20 billion connected devices that have to be contacted, that will report information, will send data, managing this scale is going to be incredible. And so that's a new challenge for the world's ICT producers. So let's go into the amazing work that's being done at CENGN. And one of your questions might be, well, who does CENGN serve and what is it in it for me, if you like? And in this room here, we have industry represented, large and small. We have government represented, provincial, city, federal. We have universities and colleges represented in the room. And we have students, and we have partners, and we have people who earn a living from this industry. So what I wanted to do is go through what's in it for you in joining to CENGN and helping to CENGN. First one I want to talk about, and I think Jenna mentioned a SME. A lot of times we talk about the SMEs. A SME is a small and medium enterprise. And I know when you first talk about that, a lot of people imagine 2 or 3 people in a basement working on some software, some hardware, or something that's going to be something cool. And yes, that is a SME. But the definition of a small and medium enterprise from CENGN and imposed on us from the government side is anything that's less than $50 million per annum or less than 500 staff. So that actually gets to be a fairly sizable company that's on a growth trajectory. And so we do have companies such as March Networks and Scenics and so on that are working inside CENGN on their next generation solutions. So what's in it for a small and medium enterprise? And we talk about commercialization, and there's been When we say that word, a lot of people can imagine what that is, but I wanted to go through that because this is the most important part of what CENGN does, is it provides a commercialization path. And if you look at the universities that are represented by CENGN and are members of CENGN, or if you look at the universities across Canada and you look at the colleges across Canada, there's $4 billion of research spent on per annum on research. And what comes out of that are great things. But what we have to also recognize is the efficiency of that $4 billion in converting it from research that becomes development of a product and then becomes a product itself that generates revenues, exports, and the things that make Canada successful. So a part of the innovation trail is to take that research, change it into development, get it from a developed product, and get it to being sales. And you can see that there's a big X in the process there, and that's, you can't just take a product, develop it in a lab, finish the software, ship it to a customer. How do you know it works? So here's where CENGN steps in, and this is the main functionality that we provide, is it's all about making sure that that product that has been developed is going to work, that it's going to work with other things that are in the network, that it can be tested properly, that it has quality, that it will be reliable. And what's becoming more and more apparent to us, and most of the projects that we now have in CENGN are all about scale. So I think you can all imagine that if you wrote a software thing, a bit of software that would do a function, so it would take something from here and send it to there, or it would allow somebody to input data here, and some kind of an app for a phone, some kind of application that sends data, encrypts data, makes data secure. There's all kinds of applications that are coming into CENGN that are being tested. How do you know it works? And it's quite easy to make it work on one path. Now what happens is, how do you make that work for 1 million subscribers or 2 million subscribers? China Mobile has 500 million plus subscribers. Can you imagine a piece of software that goes in and breaks that? Can you imagine what would happen if Bell Mobility was brought down by a little piece of software? This is getting to be a disaster. We think about how much we use our cell phones, how much we use the internet, how many people depend on computers every day. So it's all about scale testing, and this is what CENGN can provide. The other thing about it being a small company is, can you afford to do scale testing? And this is a very key component to this whole process, is that we have a lot of small companies represented here, and you've seen the slide that I had. There's 30 companies that have gone through CENGN. There's another 11 waiting to get it or are in the lab today. And then through the Ontario expansion program, we will do 150 more projects like this. Why are those companies coming to CENGN rather than doing it in their own labs? Well, they have to build a lab. And so you'll see that we have, at CENGN, have built a lab that's now on the list price level is worth $14.4 million. And it's not just the fact that you build a lab like this, but the fact that we have the expertise to build it, expertise to maintain it, the expertise to control it, the expertise to make it secure, and to have it multi-tenant. And that's another important aspect of it, is to be able to have a project happening and another project and another project and another project all happening at the same time without bringing the entire lab down, so that if there's 10 projects in there at once, each project goes on its own. So the architecture of the lab is built in a way that this scale testing can be done. So one of the examples is a small company that's in, and they're going to be testing a DVR, so it's a digital video recorder that gets deployed somewhere in the world instantaneously. You can spin it up at a moment's notice. It will capture video, record it, send it back at its leisure. So the scale testing on that is how many of those video DVRs can be spun up in how much compute resource before the whole thing can't take the capacity. How fast can you spin them up? How many VM virtual machines can you organize? How many can you layer on top of each other before the software can't keep up with all that's happening? So scale testing. And then the last one on this list as part of commercialization is the demonstration process. So again, we have companies like Solana Networks. Solana is a company located here in Kanata. Small company, and they make a topology mapping software, very good. And that topology mapping, it goes into larger networks, and it looks around and it finds out, and it pays attention to the routing tables, and it has a live view of the entire network at all times. Very useful for companies like Cisco and like Bell Canada and like TELUS and Rogers to understand what is happening in their entire routed network. Now the thing is that when Solana wants to demonstrate that product, they don't have a Bell mobility in their lab. So how do you demonstrate? Well, you could go over to Bell and try and do that, but there's maybe some hesitancy for a large production carrier to be able to install something that is just first time being seen and to put that into a live network and all the things that have to happen with that, with security and so on. So what Solana was able to do is come into the CENGN lab, install their solution, make sure that it worked with the CENGN environment, and then demonstrate it to international partners. In this case, it was a Tier 1 member of CENGN that was looking at that. And then that Tier 1 member liked what they saw that the product was great and bulletproof, and then took that to market and quoted it to a customer in Europe. And that's now bringing a go-to-market channel for, in this case, Solana networks. That's just one example. We have 30 of those kind of examples happening. So that's the first group, is what's in it for a small company, that commercialization and that leverage that they have. And it's all about driving innovation, taking things from a development or from a research point of view, turning them into real products. Next, I wanted to talk about our members, our Tier 1 members. And here's the list of them. As you can see, it's a very impressive list. And what I wanted to show is the fact that if we look at the members of CENGN, those CENGN members are marked in the yellow color here. If you look at the R&D spending that those companies are spending in Canada, it adds up to $2 billion per annum in research and development investment. And as we said, much of that is happening in Canada, but it's happening right across the country as well. And if you look at it, the ones that are not CENGN members, that's another $2 billion. So there's $4 billion being spent in Canada in R&D in the area of ICT from our point of view. The other thing I wanted to point out is how does that rank in terms of research and development overall in Canada outside of the ICT industry. So you can see the ranking on the left-hand side, those numbers. So number 5, 7, 8, and so on, that's ranking in Canada overall. So that list would normally include Bombardier and so on, who are spending more. But if you look at it, how many of these are in the top 100? It's quite amazing. So it's the ICT business that's driving the innovation economy in Canada to a large degree. $4 billion spent in the companies, $4 billion spent in universities. And so there we go. The next thing is, what is the benefit for a member to join CENGN? They pay fees, they come in. What is the benefit? So first of all, they can do the kind of testing that I also described for the small and medium enterprises. If the company is a member of CENGN, they also get to have an early look at those companies, and they get to see those technologies. And you might say, well, if these companies are spending that amount of R&D, can't they do it themselves? And that's a valid question. But what you'll find is that these small and entrepreneurial companies are more innovative, more agile and quick, and there are a lot of very good ideas out there. And so being a member of CENGN provides an early look at all of those kind of applications. And it also gives the small and medium enterprise these partners to work with to go to market. So it's a wonderful thing for members to join and be active in CENGN. So here's kind of a graphic of how that works. So you have the large Tier 1 member working with the small and medium enterprise. There's another component that drives this, is the academia side of it. And that's getting students, engineers, product management staff, and so on, to come in and to get that project through and get it to market. And then we also have some partners at CENGN as well. So we have partners such as Canary, which is the national fiber optic backbone partner, which is connecting CENGN across the country. And we're going to be expanding that with the Orion network in Ontario, and we're going to be expanding CENGN into multiple hubs, and this will be talked about with Mr. Bill Mantell. We'll talk about this afternoon. And so there's other partners that come in who supply hardware, software, and components to CENGN to be able to empower us to be a full lab and a full experience and a full ecosystem that can be used. So let's talk about academia. So here are the partners that CENGN has, and what CENGN does is we work with these universities to get the best and the brightest students, typically students such as 3rd and 4th year engineering students, students which are on their way perhaps to a master's or even a PhD program. And we bring those students into CENGN on either a 4-month or an 8-month intern basis. They work in this lab, and then they go on to their career. They either go back to their university and finish out their university and graduate, and then they join the companies that are out there looking for top talent. And what this allows these students to gain is they work in a real environment with real solutions in an open environment as well. CENGN is very much about the open software community, and that's very much driven by younger people, students, coders, and so on. And that's where these people come from. And these students add value to their resume by going through CENGN because they learn about the environment, they learn about real working conditions, they get a really great technology dump into their heads, and then they're better prepared to join those companies and hit the road running. The Tier 1 members that hire these students afterwards, they benefit because they get students that are ready to go, ready to do the proper work, students that have real-world experience on cutting-edge applications. So it's all about the innovation curve, once again. So out of the university, in through CENGN, perhaps back to university, back to CENGN, and then into the tech company. So that's our model. Now I wanted to talk a little bit more about the technology that we have inside CENGN. And this looks a little bit like a Finnish hockey jersey here with so many logos, right? But Boris and the team in the lab they've taken all of these open source code, they've built it into the lab in an OpenStack, Open Daylight, Kubernetes, and I could go on and on through the logos, built this environment. And there's a couple things about that. To install and get each application on its own working, that's a challenge already. The real value of CENGN in terms of a technology is to take all of those things, install them all in the lab, and make them all work with each other. And that even requires CENGN to write its own code to band-aid these things together. To pay attention to what's happening in this entire ecosystem of open source, to keep up with all of the next version and next version and next version. And in the open source world, this stuff moves pretty quickly. And then what CENGN does is we look at it, we harden it, we make sure that it's working properly, and then we do a formal release of each load. So that when a partner comes in, a small or medium enterprise comes in, or a Tier 1 member brings a small and medium enterprise in and they start to do a project, it's not the lab that is the limitation, and it's the lab that's already been hardened and is working, and it's their application that then they can test. So quite a phenomenal work that the team is doing inside CENGN. The other thing we need to do at CENGN is we need to be world-class, and we could all imagine an innovation where Canada does something for Canada with Canadian technology, but if we're behind the global curve, how long would that be sustainable? And so one of the things that CENGN does is we have quite a global view of what's happening in the advancement of software and the advancement of open source initiatives. And so we're working with companies or forums and organizations such as the OPNFV, Linux Foundation, the OpenStack, Open Daylight, looking at the ETSI standards, and working with FDIO. And so what CENGN needs to do and will continue to do is stay on the bleeding edge of the latest open source code and be able to support projects that leverage that code. And one of the questions always that comes up is, well, wait a minute. If one of your Tier 1 members makes all of its money from selling software, and then the open source community is coming along with software that's essentially low cost or even free in some cases, how will the big companies survive if free stuff is coming along? It's a great question, and it's one that concerns everyone. Well, here's two realities. One is those big companies can't afford to stay just in their bubble and not pay attention to this, if we wanted to call it a threat. But I think most companies have recognized, and most companies are contributing to the open source community on purpose because they realize that reinventing the wheel over and over and over again is not productive. And by taking the open source code that exists and adding bells and whistles around the outside and making a hardened solution that serves a particular customer's needs is what it's about. So if, you know, and I think we're starting to see, and we've seen this through the computer data center world, now we're seeing it through the telecom and other aspects of the ICT industry, is that if you aren't open source, you're probably going to be inefficient. You're probably not going to make enough money and margin. You're probably going to be slow to market. You're probably not going to have the latest and greatest. And by the way, because a lot of your customers are also into the open source communities, they'll be watching this space and they'll be adopting this open source code. So there's a great market for companies to take open source, package it in a way that serves a particular application, add things onto it, and get it to market quickly, and monetize that, and then service it and maintain it and look after their customers. So that's a part of what we're doing. I put up this is a simplified map of the network of CENGN. And later on today, you're going to hear about our expansion plans, thanks to the Ontario government funding. So the federal government money has allowed us to build what we have so far, the NCE funding that we have. And we have a tremendous lab. We also have, when we bring in a Tier 1 member, that Tier 1 member pays a membership fee per annum, but they also contribute in-kind software and hardware to build out our lab. So what we've done is we've got Nokia and Cisco and Juniper and Wind River, and we've got a lot of stuff in our lab that has been built out so that the lab is world class. And thanks to our Tier 1 members for that contribution. And that's in the lab, but we've also got another kind of contribution from our service provider partners. So as you can see, we have fiber optic connections from Bell, TELUS, Rogers, and others. And this connects into Canary, and very soon it will connect into Orion. And our expansion in Orion will see us to have the CENGN data center hub and lab is here in Canada. We will duplicate that in the Bayview Yards part of Invest Ottawa in that building, so that will be 2 hubs in this area. Then that will be duplicated again in the Mars District Research Centers in Toronto and in Communitech in Waterloo. And those will be the 4 major hubs of the Ontario expansion program. And then there'll be 15 regional innovation centers across Ontario in smaller towns. And what this becomes is now an on-ramp for those companies that are located in Sudbury, North Bay, Kingston, wherever, that they can now connect into the CENGN lab at a high speed with security, with a straight pipe, and they can then put something into the hubs, run it, test it, and then get feedback. What this does is it speeds up the innovation process, because if you have to travel from Sudbury to Toronto or Sudbury to Ottawa, do an experiment, pack up all your stuff, fly back, do some more coding, fly back, that's a very inefficient process. So by expanding into these regional innovation centers, we're going to capture more companies, and we're going to drive 150 new projects through this initiative. So if I was to put that onto the map, you can see we've already got our center in Ottawa, in Canada here. It's just walking distance from here if you haven't been there. And we welcome you to come and visit. The expansion plan in Ontario is there with the 4 hubs and the 15 regional innovation centers. And in the longer term vision, what we would like to do is to duplicate that into Edmonton, Calgary, Vancouver, Halifax, and some other places. And in addition to what's happening in Ontario, that would make a nationwide network. And so it's connectivity through Orion in Ontario, through our partners such as Bell, TELUS, and Rogers, and connections through Canary, the research network across Canada, connecting into the other provinces. And we'll start to encourage RISC in Quebec and other research fiber optic networks and innovation centers in the other provinces to join. So eventually we plan this to be a national program. The other thing about this is I talked a lot about the telecom applications and the projects that we were doing right now, but there's also a larger picture of innovation that's happening. The applications that could be tested on the CENGN platform, especially once we expand, could be in the pure application space as well. So whether it's a digital software program that does something around agriculture, mining, healthcare. There's all sorts of things that could be imagined. And a part of the Ontario expansion program is to also, for CENGN to advise the Ontario government and to do proofs of concepts for the Ontario government about what could be done about northern and rural broadband. And as you can imagine, here in Canada, we have everything that we need to develop software and hardware and solutions that can serve a customer. If you live in a place like Kirkland Lake, do you have that same luxury? And what will drive the innovation of the North? And so what CENGN can start to empower through this is training and also to support applications that could be developed and tested in remote places such as that. So it's a kind of an interesting thing. The other thing that's happening is that there's all kinds of, if you look at really at what the digital economy is starting to transform in, there isn't a single industry that isn't touched by this, and a single industry that frankly must be supported by this. And I know that there's a supercluster program, not announced yet, but as we look at the supercluster bids that have gone in, every single one of them has a huge component of digital backbone into it, of compute, telecom, applications, software. And so CENGN could be the backbone for that kind of development. Good. So lastly, I'd like to really give a shout out to our funding partners, the Government of Canada, especially through the NCE, the National Centres of Excellence program. That's what's built CENGN to date. And today, as you heard from Minister Moridi, and we're looking at a program with the Ontario government for this expansion into Ontario, and later on we'll hear from Mr. Bill Mantell on this subject. And we'd also like to thank the City of Ottawa and Invest Ottawa for their kind contributions to CENGN as well.